Thank you very much, Barney. Yes, thank you very much for having me, folks. As Barney said, I work for Ulster Wildlife on the CAN project. So tonight I just want to chat to you about what is CAN, what involvement Ulster Wildlife have had, why Cuilcagh and Slieve Anierin is so special from a biodiversity and natural heritage point of view, and the wildlife that we find there. We've been writing a conservation management plan for the sites, both in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and that's kind of a roadmap for the future of what would be the best management for the site in terms of the wildlife and the nature that we have up there. And give you an overview of every step that went into the plan, and there was a lot, and all the on-ground works that we've done. So we weren't just sitting at a desk typing up a plan, we were out in the middle of winter with diggers on the bog and doing lots of great work as well. And then just what's next then after CAN. So Ulster Wildlife then, we are Northern Ireland's largest local nature conservation charity. So we've been working in the space for about 40 years now. We've got 19 of our own nature reserves, but we've got lots of projects like the one we're working on now, where we work across other areas in Northern Ireland and also the Republic of Ireland as well. We've got 14,000 members, which we wouldn't be able to do the work without, and 100 volunteers. And so I've been working with Ulster Wildlife for the past 4 years, as Barney said, on the CAN project. You might know some of the other Ulster Wildlife folks, Giles and Peter and Stephen. They're working in the Enniskillen office. So there's 4 of us down here in Enniskillen, and then everybody else is out east. So what is CAN then? Such a lovely acronym, Collaborative Action for the Natura Network. So it's an EU Interreg funded project. It's all about cross-border cooperation. So the east of Scotland, Northern Ireland and the border counties in the Republic of Ireland are all involved, and the whole premise of it is that nature doesn't adhere to borders. So when we're working to try and secure a future for our wildlife here, then we also have to work across borders. So CAN was a £9.4 million project, which seems like a huge amount of money, and it is, but it's done a huge amount of work across a lot of sites. So we have developed 27 conservation management plans, which cover over 25,000 hectares of land, focused on peatland and wetland habitats. And we've done direct conservation work to restore over 3,650 hectares. So we've been working with 10 different partners, and the lead partners are Newry Morning Down, and we've got Chris here from ABC. So we're a real mix of councils, conservation charities, universities, researchers, all working together on the project. And each of the wee green dots is all the sites that we have. So Cuilcagh is one of our 3 cross-border sites, so it's a real flagship site for the project. It's 12,500 hectares altogether when you take both of the areas in. So we're working on what are called SACs, Special Areas of Conservation. So these are sites that are designated at an EU level because it recognises how important the habitats that you find there are internationally. So we might look up at somewhere like Cuilcagh or out on our raised bogs, and they're just so normal in our landscape, but on an international stage they're actually really, really rare and important habitats. So Cuilcagh is designated in Northern Ireland, so you can see the red outline there, and it also goes the whole way down through Cavan and into Leitrim in the Republic of Ireland. It's, as I say, 12,500 hectares, and it takes in quite a few different peaks. You've got Cuilcagh Mountain up there, we've got Ben Brack and Ben Croy, Slieve Anierin's a big peak in Leitrim there, just north of Drumshanbo. We've got lots of community groups around it, so yourselves and Florence Court and Kalesher, Swanlin Bar, Glengavlin, and then we've got Dowra and Balnaglera, Balnamore, Drumshanbo. So there's quite a huge catchment of rural communities where Cuilcagh and Slieve Anierin are a real focal point in. And so before I dive into what can does, I wanted to give a bit of a background about why we think Cuilcagh is so special and the amazing flora and fauna that you find up there and why it's worth protecting. So the sites are of special interest for their geology, which probably comes as no surprise because we've got the geopark in the area, and I'm not a geologist, so I'm not going to go into that, but really important geology in the area. Fermanagh and Cavan parts of the site fall within the geopark's footprint, but also the upland flora and fauna. The Republic of Ireland site's about 3 times the size of the Northern Ireland side. There's over 450 landowners across the whole site, so we tried our best to get in touch with as many as possible, but it just gives you an idea of the scale of the work that we were doing. 73% of the site is commonage, which just adds another layer of complexity then when you're doing works on the ground. And as I say, highly protected and designated, so it's a special area of conservation. In Northern Ireland, it's an area of special scientific interest that recognises how important it is at a national level for the species that you find there. It's called what's known as a Ramsar site, which is a global designation for wetland sites. It's within the geopark, so it's just got all of these acronyms tagged onto the end of it, just recognising how important it actually is. In Northern Ireland, it's the second largest expanse of blanket bog, and blanket bog is the main reason why Cuilcagh is so important, and I'll come on to that in a wee second. And in the Republic of Ireland, it contains one of the most intact areas of blanket bog in the whole island of Ireland. So researchers from Queen's were trying to find intact bogs to study, and they scoped the whole of Ireland, and they found 3 areas that they could say have been natural, undamaged, as intact as they possibly could be, and one of them was Loch Craddy Bog on the western side of the Cavan section of Cuilcagh. I'm not going to go through all these, but this is all the different habitats that the site is important for, down till a specific moss species that is very rare that people can get very excited about. We've got the blanket bog, obviously, or different heath habitats. We've got quite a few of these which are called oligotrophic and dystrophic lakes. They're just very nutrient poor lakes, and because they're so nutrient poor, the kind of species that you find there are very adapted to them. So by virtue can be quite rare as well. So we've got some really interesting rare beetles and stuff that you can find in these lakes. And we've also got Montane Heath as well on the summit of Cuilcagh. It's quite a rare habitat, especially in Ireland, so very worth protecting. So we're saying blanket bog is why Cuilcagh is so special. So it's a peatland habitat, so we're probably familiar with our raised bogs. They're like those dome-shaped ones that you'll find like down the Midlands and dotted across the landscape. So they came into being from when the glaciers retreated, left all these little lakes behind, and they gradually filled up with partially decomposed plants to form our raised bogs. And blanket bogs are slightly different in that they cloak the uplands. That's where that blanket term comes from. They're shallower, so our raised bogs could be up to 12 metres deep in places, whereas our blanket bogs formed a little bit later and they're only about 4 to 7 metres deep, so about 4,000 to 7,000 years ago. So how does a bog form? So basically a bog is just partially decomposed plants, and the main bog building plant is this sphagnum. This is sphagnum moss, and it's a very special plant. It makes up most of the peat that's beneath our feet up in Cuilcagh, and that's because it has a few tricks. So it grows from the tip, and then the bottom of the plant dies off, and that's what's left behind to form the peat. And it also releases hydrogen ions whenever it takes up nutrients, and that makes the surrounding area more acidic. So it's actually actively making its surroundings more suitable for forming peat, because their bacteria that would normally eat the plants can't survive in such acidic conditions. So you need over 1,200 millimetres of rain for most of the year to form a blanket bog. So Cavan, Fermanagh and Leitrim are perfect for it. Anything that bogs need to be wet, that's it, like they just want to be as wet as possible. So anything that impacts the hydrology of the bog and takes water off it or takes away that surface vegetation, these lovely mosses, will have a negative impact on the bog. So we call a bog active whenever it's taking carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it into these plants. Those plants partially rot and form peat. But if we start to get a drop in the water table, or with climate change, we get less rain coming in, our bogs start to dry out. So not only are they not taking carbon in and forming peat, but they're actually starting to lose carbon to the atmosphere again or into our rivers. So the number one thing that we always are looking for whenever we're doing this kind of work is how can we make it even wetter than it already is. And I know from Fermanagh you're going, what is wrong with you? It's wet enough as it is. So we call our peatlands quite often our version of rainforests. And I think as well, when they're sitting on your doorstep, you don't realise how special they actually are. Like, our peatlands cover less of an area in the world than rainforests, and we're all running about saying we need to save the Amazon rainforest, it's so important. But peatlands store twice as much carbon as all the world's forests combined. So when you think like our raised bogs and our blanket bogs, that's thousands of years worth of carbon sitting below our feet. If that stays in there, great. If it's actively taking carbon out of the atmosphere, even better. But if they're starting to get damaged and that's being released, it's kind of a scary thought about all those thousands of years worth of carbon being put back into the atmosphere. And unfortunately in the UK and Ireland, our bogs and peatlands are actually net emitters of carbon now because they've been that badly damaged. So it's really important that we do the work like what we're doing up in Cuilcagh at the moment to try and keep our peatlands nice and healthy. And it's not just for the carbon. I think sometimes we can get carbon tunnel vision. There's so many other benefits to these habitats. They're home to really rare and endangered species. They store water and reduce flash flooding downstream when they're in a healthy condition. They are a vital hill farming resource, and they offer opportunities for access. So there's loads of benefits for them. Obviously the things that I'm most interested in is all the lovely bugs and beasties and everything that we get up there. So I wanted to take like a little tour through Cuilcagh, through our senses tonight. So first one, what we're going to look at is all the sights of Cuilcagh. So I think when we look out on a landscape like Cuilcagh, we can kind of see it as a big brown expanse in front of us. But when you actually get your eye in, there's so much colour and life happening in them. So you've seen all the really colourful sphagnum mosses there. That is like a little Persian rug below your feet when you actually look in, and they're purple, green, red, orange, yellow. They can be really stunning. And then you get things like the top right here is our matchstick lichen. That's a symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungi, and really quirky little organisms, and can be really beautiful colours. Or orchids here, you wouldn't really think about getting orchids up somewhere like Cuilcagh, but you can get lovely common spotted and Heath spotted orchids. So along Gort McConnell, you'll see lots of beautiful orchids there. This little one I think is gorgeous. It's called Starry saxifrage, and you get it up on the very summits. It's very rare. I've never actually seen it, but there's great botanists there. What's his name? He wrote the Flora and Fauna of Fermanagh. Yes, Robert and his wife Hannah have spotted so many amazing rare plants, and I'd really encourage you to read the book. Like, it's fab. Down the bottom is our bog asphodel, and it's like a beautiful sea of yellow flowers. You'll often hear it called the bone breaker. So it used to be thought that animals grazing on it would have brittle bones, but it wasn't actually the plant that was causing it. It's because the plant grows in calcium poor habitats, so they weren't getting enough calcium, and then that's what was causing the brittle bones. And it was also used for dyes as well in the past. This one here is a fir club moss, and it's part of a very ancient group of plants that have been around for over 300 million years. So you'll get these on the summit of Cuilcagh. This is an emperor moth, so I just love its little eye spots there. That's like a predator distraction adaptation. The females will sit there and just wait for the males to come to them, which is a great strategy. And it lets off these pheromones, and it can go for miles, and the male can detect it and spot the female. So you often see the males flitting over on nice sunny days across the landscape. And then I just think I put in the lizard because I think people would be surprised that we actually have common lizards in Ireland. And what's unique about the lizards we have here is that it might seem like they give birth to live young, so they actually keep their eggs inside them and then give birth to live baby lizards. So you'll often see them sunning themselves on a nice spring day out on the bog. So that's, and then title of the talk is the hen harrier sky dance. So this is our hen harrier. So on Cuilcagh we have more hen harriers than some of the sites that are designated in Ireland for hen harriers. So Cuilcagh isn't designated for it, but we have over 7 pairs of this really rare bird foraging across the landscape, and they've fledged more chicks here around Cuilcagh than in some of the sites that are meant to be the best for this animal. So although it's not nesting in the site, it is foraging in it, and we would love to see them eventually nesting within it. So this is the sky dance. It's a really intricate aerial mating display, and what they'll do is pass food from male to female. So it's very famous. People will go out and try and get shots of this sky dance. So that's our male hen harrier. It's like this beautiful grey bluey colour with the black wingtips, and that's the female. The female's bigger than the male, and it's a lovely barred brown and buff colour. They're actually quite small birds, so they've got like a big wingspan, 1.2 metres, but they only weigh up to 500 grams. And as I say, Cuilcagh is a very, very important site for them. And then for the sounds then of Cuilcagh, so it's kind of sad when we're talking to the landowners that have been up there for years, like John McNulty, for example. He's lived there all his life, over 80 years, and he would say one of the saddest things is that he doesn't hear as much birdsong up there anymore. So hopefully some of the work we're doing will bring that back again. But some of the characteristic sounds you would hear is, this is the golden plover. It's like a really haunting call that you'll hear. Cuilcagh is one of the last breeding sites for golden plover in Northern Ireland, but even there I think we only had 1 breeding pair last year, so very, very endangered. You'll see a lot of them in the winter time, flocks going over the mountain, but in terms of being our breeding pairs, we have very, very few now left. There might be some in Pettigo and some in the Antrim Hills. So yeah, that's a really good claim to fame for the mountain, to actually have this wee rare bird still here. Then of course we have a red grouse, which would be quite a familiar, you would think would be quite a familiar sight on our uplands, and it is, but it's actually quite an endangered bird now as well. So you hear the wee go back, go back, go back, go back, go back sound. So again, they are actually doing quite well on Cuilcagh because we've got a couple of clubs in the area that are doing some great work to try and bring them back. So in Leitrim, we've got the Regional Game Council there that have been working in the area for the past 20 years. When you see the maps later, where the grouse are is where that amazing club has been doing all of their work, and we're thinking that it's spreading out from there. So it just goes to show you how important the local grassroots work is for these species. Like, they've been operating on their own just out of sheer passion for seeing this species coming back. This one is the snipe. So hear that woo. So that's not actually its call. That's the wind, its tail feathers vibrating really quickly, making that noise. So you'll hear it around sunset over the mountain, and that woo noise. They're sometimes called the weather bleat because they make that bleating boo noise. And then we've got, this is obviously a very characteristic, but again, not heard as much as we used to, this sound. That's our lovely cuckoo. So the cuckoo, you wouldn't really find it far up the mountain. There's one on Leg na Brockie there that I hear every year. So the cuckoo parasitizes the nest of our meadow pipit. So meadow pipit's this little brown bird. There's quite a lot of them up on the mountain there. It's also numbers are also declining of it, and what the cuckoo does is lays its eggs in the little meadow pipit's nest, and like the meadow pipit is tiny and then the cuckoo chick is huge. It kicks all the other chicks out of the nest. The poor meadow pipit is left feeding this cuckoo. So it's quite a good strategy, I suppose, but cruel on the poor little meadow pipit. And then the last one then that you'll hear very often up there, and it's beautiful, is our skylark. Quite a hectic call. The skylark then, big inspiration for poets, and you can see why. They do this thing where they're able to make their bird song but breathe in at the same time. And I've recently heard that there's some car manufacturing companies that are actually trying to study how it's doing that so that they can make their cars and their exhaust and engines more efficient. So it's funny the way you can get inspiration from nature sometimes. They can get up and make that call for 10 minutes straight without coming back down again. So they'll shoot away up in the sky. You'll not see them, but you'll hear them because they're that high up, and then they'll do a lovely parachute back down again. So we've got good enough numbers of our skylark up in Cuilcagh, and again declined significantly. It probably would have been more of a farmland bird at the time, but kind of starting to be more upland in its reach. So touch then. This is a butterwort. I found my first butterwort up there this year. So it has a beautiful little purple horn-shaped flower at the top, but underneath are these deadly tentacles. So if you feel the surface of it, feels like a greasy butter feeling of it. I actually quite like it. Some people think it's disgusting. And the insects get trapped in it. The leaves fold over and it digests the insect. So a lot of our plants here are very highly adapted to the uplands because they're such harsh, horrible environments to live in. They have to have adaptations to live there. So they're very nutrient poor environments. So this is the way that the plants use to get that nutrient boost. So we've got 3 different insect-eating plants actually on our bogs. Butterworts, sundews, and bladderworts is another one. They eat underwater invertebrates. Our sphagnum then, in terms of our sense of touch, if you actually pick up sphagnum and squeeze it, a crazy amount of water will come out of it because our sphagnums can hold up to 20 times their weight in water. So when you think about reducing flooding downstream, that's a big part of it, is that they're able to store that water up there for longer. And then the last ones are cotton grasses. So we've got 2 types. We've got hare's tail, because the little tufts, these are seed heads, looks like little tufts of the hare's tail. And this is many-headed, and it's beautiful. If you get up there on a windy day and they're just bellowing in the breeze, it's really, really nice to see. The last one is, as I say, bogs are wet. So you're going to go up there, you're going to get wet, and we've got lots of these lovely bog pools. So Cuilcagh has really important underwater invertebrates. You can see the little air bubble on the tail of this little water beetle. So it's bog pool systems and it's lochs, because they're nutrient poor, will have quite rare and adapted species living in them. Then we've got taste. So this is bilberry, or frothin, sometimes you hear them called. So in Ireland, people would have gone up on I think it was the last Sunday in July, Frothin Sunday, to go up and pick the bilberries, and they make really beautiful jams and tarts. They're also associated with Lunasa, I think, as well, so they would have went up the first harvest in August to go collect the bilberries, and it was said if there was a good harvest of bilberries, it meant it was a good sign of a good harvest then for the rest of the year. And then this is bog bean. Did anyone ever taste bog bean? Were they ever made to drink it when they were younger? No. So when we chat to some of the landowners up there, bog bean used to be boiled into this horrible concoction, and people were made drink it, and it was meant to be good for the blood. I don't know what that means, but it was good for the blood. So you were forced to take spoonfuls off it every morning. And it's got these beautiful little hairy white flowers, and there's a lovely big pool of them on Lake Anyway, there's a walkway up there. Over on the right hand side before the hazel woodlands, there's a big pool full of them. Saying about our insect eating plants, I just love this photo on the right here because it looks like jaws coming out of the water to like snap up a poor insect here. Again, just like the butterwort, they get stuck in these little sticky tentacles. These are like the size of your fingernail. They're quite small little things, and they close in on themselves and digest the insect, and that's how it gets a little boost of nutrients up there. And then in terms of our sense of smell then, we've got the good and the bad. So the good is the bog myrtle. It's one of my favourite things about going up on Cuilcagh on a nice summer's day. If you go through a patch of the bog myrtle, they're like these sort of shrubs coming up to about here, and they have this gorgeous, gorgeous smell. I've seen Scotland now putting them into like face creams and that because they smell that good. The Vikings apparently used to drink a concoction of them before they went into battle, and it was said to be the thing that gave them that big frenzy that was associated with their wars. They're also used to flavour beers before hops as well, and they're still used in Scotland in whisky making as well. And then we've got the bad. We've got feral goats up there, and you will smell them before you'll see them. They are awful. Goats can be really ecologically destructive. We don't have them in high enough numbers up on Cuilcagh for that to be the case, but you do find them over on the west of the site, on near the Fermanagh and Cavan border. They've been spotted. So that's the sights and sounds and smells and touch of Cuilcagh and all the lovely things that I think make it special. And maybe if you're not up there all the time, you maybe don't realise the diversity and the quirkiness maybe of some of the plants and animals that you get up there. So why is it an SEC? Obviously for all those amazing plants and animals that you get up there. The main reason why it's an SEC is because of this blanket bog habitat. So the UK and Ireland have 20% of the world's blanket bog coverage. So we're a really important resource for this habitat. And an SAC just offers strict protection, and there's a requirement for them to be managed properly for the species and habitats they're designated for. But what tend to happen is they were designated and then no advice or any management was put in place afterwards. So now that's where these management plans have come into play, is that NIA and NPWS have asked the likes of ourselves in these projects to go and write a management plan so that they are better equipped to put funding in place or agri-environment schemes in place or policies in place by having all this information from the management plans. So the habitats and species that are site designated for are called designation features. So for Cuilcagh, blanket bog is its designation feature. And it has criteria set for what is considered a good blanket bog, a healthy blanket bog. And when it's healthy, it's called in favourable condition. So when we're writing our management plans, we're trying to get them into this favourable condition. It just means they're healthy, they're doing what they're meant to be doing. So as I say, yeah, some of them, NIE and NPWS have asked us to write them, and there's a 5-step approach to writing them. So we collect as much information about the habitats and species that we can. We look at what are all the pressures and threats facing the site. We do stakeholder engagement, so we were out in lots of community halls doing one-to-one conversations with as many landowners as we could. And then we specify management actions, so what, if anything, needs to be done to deal with any of the pressures and threats. And then NIA and NPWS, who are the environment agencies north and south, go and take that plan and they do what's called a habitat regulation assessment. It's just a legal requirement to make sure that what I'm saying doesn't actually inadvertently cause damage to the site. What I'm saying in the plan doesn't inadvertently cause damage. So the whole idea is that we have all these plans and they enhance cooperation and efficiency across managing all of these sites. Might make us think of more innovative ways to try and manage the site, and then just all about targeting the efforts and the resources and the money to try and bring them into good condition again. So this is what we did on Cuilcagh. We collected as much information as we could that was already existing, surveys, maps, reports, and Cuilcagh is a really heavily, on the Northern Ireland side, a really heavily studied site. And then we did lots of remote sensing. So basically that was just putting drones up or planes up to try and collect as much information as we could. So we did high resolution photography, which is good for looking at things like quad tracts or conifers or erosion, that kind of stuff. And then we also collected this thing called LiDAR. And basically how LiDAR works, it's kind of similar to how a bat would hunt. So it sends a pulse out, it sends a pulse down onto the ground, and then that bounces back up again to a sensor on the aircraft. And from that, you're able to get an idea of the topography of the site. You can build up a picture of the topography of the site. And from that, you can get things like the height of the vegetation, up to 50 centimetres. Yeah, so that's it. Pulse down, back up, and then we get pictures. So this is just an ordinary picture of a drained area on Cuilcagh. So you can see here, looks like quite a few drains running across it. But when we look at our LiDAR, we get a much more detailed picture. So the blue areas are higher sloped and the green areas are flatter. And then you can see all these little white lines running through. That's where all the water's flowing. So that really easily lets us see where's the water flowing into these drains and where the drains are. We've now got a map of all the flow across the whole site, and all these black lines are catchments, so we can see where all the water is running from in the uplands down into the rivers below. We've got an idea of the slopes, so all of these yellow areas are high slopes. You can see where all of the cliff edges and stuff are. And then we did this thing called SCIR. So when you take an ordinary photo, that's what it looks like on the right. You can kind of see maybe some different habitats there. It's maybe a wee bit harder to pick out, but when you collect it it's called the infrared spectrum. So we see everything in the visible spectrum, and this is able to collect it in the infrared spectrum. And by doing that, you get a way more detailed picture of all the different habitats there. So that's all great. We could sit on our desks and do that, but nothing replaces getting out on the ground and falling into drains and figuring out what we're looking at. So we did loads of site walkovers to identify pressures and threats across the site. And there was these great folks from the Golden Eagle Trust who were so dedicated to the cause of recording the birds on the mountain that they've spent multiple nights camping out up there so that they could count all the bird species. So they did a phenomenal amount of work, and I'll show you the maps that they produced. So from that, we've got a habitat map. As you can see, everything in orange is blanket bog, so there's a lot of bog up here. This is every point that we noted as we walked across of potential pressure, threat, fence, you name it, it's dotted down there. And so these are some of the things that Golden Eagle Trust picked up. So these are all the sightings of hen harrier across the site for the last 3 years. We'll have another year's worth of data on top of this. These are the densities of red grouse. So the interesting thing is, remember saying about that local club? So this is where they operate. So they've been leasing an area of Cuilcagh land here for the last 20 years, and they've obviously been doing a really great job because there's very good numbers of red grouse there. Snipe. Cuilcagh and Slieve Anierin is nationally important for the amount of snipe that you have up here. So the Golden Eagle Trust couldn't get over how much snipe there was up on the mountain, and they said they think that it probably represents about 4% of the whole of Ireland's total snipe population. So yeah, great snipe numbers. Conifers. We mapped over 5,000 conifers across the whole site, encroaching in from neighbouring forestry. And that's a big pressure because they dry out the bog, but they also act as a perching post for avian predators. So like our hooded crows and that will sit on it and be able to scope out all the lovely little fledgling red grouse and pick them off. So we are now starting this tomorrow to take out all of this western section of conifers. There's 2 local contractors from Cavan doing it for us. So yeah, 5,000 of these is no mean feat to try and get rid of. And then we look at other considerations. So when we're writing the management plan, we're looking at what impact it might have on farming, tourism, archaeology, heritage. And we've asked all of the local people that came to any of our stakeholder events about what their vision is for the site. So we don't want it to just be, there's fantastic birds and habitats up here, nobody touched them, we're managing them. Like, we want people to be able to take ownership of it and find out what else is important to them about the site and try and incorporate it all into the management plan. We delineated all the management units, so pretty much wherever there was a fence line or a steep cliff, we made that a management unit. It's just a wee bit easier for us to then recommend actions on it. And then we identify all the pressures and the threats. So these are all the things that we'd identified. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's quite a lot up there, but I'll talk about some of the big issues that we had on the site that we'd like to see some work done on. So wildfires. I think no one will be surprised that they have a massive impact up there. When there's uncontrolled burns, they destroy the vegetation, and even the vegetation that comes back mightn't be what was there before. It's more prone to overgrazing and erosion, and then obviously they always happen at a really terrible time of the year. So you'll often find these happening at the start of spring when all the birds have found their nesting sites, maybe have actually laid some eggs or reared some chicks, and then that's 1 year's worth of a population just decimated. So they're having a really big impact up there. This is one that happened near Doon. It caused over £500,000 worth of damage to the neighbouring conifer plantation there. And as you can see, it's an area of high erosion in that too. So we developed a wildfire management plan. So we brought in experts from Catalonia that work all over the world to write this plan. They've done one in the Mournes in Slieve Bay as well. And we developed a cross-border wildfire stakeholder group. So we had guys from the fire service either side, the environment groups, local farmers, mountain rescue, the geopark, all sat in on it. And this is the kind of stuff that you get. So it divides the mountain up into what are called fire polygons. And basically all a fire polygon is if a fire starts in it, it's very likely to just burn that whole area because there's no rivers or changes in vegetation or anything to stop it. So this is present day scenario, and this is with climate change. So you can see that the fires are going to get much more severe and cover much larger areas. So the idea is to do preemptive management. This is a horribly complicated map, which I'm not going to try and explain, but basically all these little hatched areas are where the guys from Catalonia said, if you get in and do something to reduce the fuel load a little bit in these areas, you're going to open up breathing spaces for the likes of the fire service to get in, or create a fire break so that the fire can't burn an even wider area. One thing that you can do is, this is our RoboCut, not to be confused with RoboCop. So see this yellow thing here? It's a remote control flail. So you know whenever people are cutting the sides of motorways, it's very dangerous to do that with a ride-on lawnmower. So they developed this machine that you could stand back and let it operate. But it's been now used in the conservation sector for managing. We were collecting heather brash here to spray it on an eroded area up in the mountain, but it's used for bracken control and rush control. This is us by hand collecting all of the heather that we've cut. Fantastic farmer engagement tool. We were trying to get people out to talk to us about how great Cuilcagh was and the birds, and we weren't getting much success. And then we had one day where we said, come down and see the RoboCut, and there was just a sea of farmers. And then we were sitting there like, can we talk to you about birds, please? Grazing, we've just got a mix of overgrazing and undergrazing. It just depends on the parcel. They obviously have their own issues. They can cause poaching. If it gets too leggy, it could be a fire risk. You know, it's just about having a balance of it across the landscape, I think. So one way we were considering potentially doing this is through these collars. So there's some areas of the site that would benefit from some cattle grazing on the lower slopes. It would actually improve the biodiversity of some of the flora that we're getting there. But we don't want them to go into the blanket bog areas because they're going to cause poaching and erosion. So we've proposed a trial for these collars that you put around the cows, and you can draw a map on your phone about where you want them to go and where you don't want them to go, and they can selectively graze areas that need grazed without actually going into other areas. So it's nice to see technology coming in, and we've got a landowner up there that would be interested in trialling it. And then it's just things like our agri-environment schemes. The other thing that I was saying there, you want to mix. So see our hen harrier bird, it likes heather above your knee, about ½ metre, blocks of it, because that's where they would naturally be nesting. But because we don't have that, they're actually nesting in young conifer plantations. as an alternative and not nesting in our site. So if we can get some more of that leggier stuff, then we might get our hen harriers in the site. On the other hand, our golden plover, which is very endangered, likes an extremely short sword. It likes to be able to see what's coming, an alarm call. So it's all about getting a bit of a balance across the site. You don't want like a one size fits all. Drainage, bogs like to be wet, and we have lots of drain. Well, we don't have lots of drains on most of the site, there's just pockets of it. So what you do is just block them up with peat dams. So we worked with John and Gary McNulty and Gort McConnell and trained them, and they had their own digger and they went up and blocked the drains themselves. So this is John and Gary out doing the drain blocking. So we used the LiDAR data to figure out where the drains were, and we got hydrologists in to say where we should block them. So each little green dot is where they put in a peat dam. Just to show you how much nerves of steel you need to do it. Like, it's just on jelly, basically. Yeah. I wouldn't like to be in the cab, let's put it that way. And you can see the water just pushing out of it. So you need bog mats, basically, so that you don't sink down in, and you need to be very careful about where you bring the digger. But luckily we had John that's lived there for 80 years and knows the site like the back of his hand, so he was able to say, go here, don't go here. So that's the beauty of being able to work with the landowners. And this is the result. So we've got all these lovely dams in, and they make these little shallow pools where we borrowed the peat from, and that's actually good for the invertebrates then, and they'll vegetate back up again. And I just love this image because it looks like we've just stitched the bog back together again. And I just think it's like a really nice image to show what we're trying to achieve up there. And then we do monitor, and we just want to see that it works. So we've just got these little blue pipes in the ground that we just measure the water table from. And if it goes up, then we know we've done a good job. Erosion's a big problem. Anything that takes away that surface vegetation, could be overgrazing, a fire, recreation pressure, quads. Once that vegetation's gone, the peat below is subject to the wind and the rain and the freezing and the drying out, and it just continues to erode. So this is an example of what happens when you've got lots of quads going across the same area. So it's just about working with landowners to figure out what's the best way to avoid these areas to allow them to come back again. This is what happens if it happens on a huge scale. It's actually hard to tell how bad this is, but this is on Slieve Anierin, and if I was standing there, those little islands of peat would be above my head. Like, they are meters deep of peat that is just washed off the mountain. So what you do is this erosion control work, which we did with Aidan and Terry McGovern, who own land in the Commonage in Northern Ireland, to work on this area around Lochotona. So we used the LiDAR to figure out what way the water was running through the site and where the bare peat was. And then this is what it looked like before. So lots of this bare peat and a lot of peat been lost. So you go in with your digger and you scoop back the vegetation and you grade it out to a nice gentle slope, and you pop the vegetation back on again. And that's the before and after. So that's peat that's not going to continue to erode anymore, and you wouldn't even know a digger was in there. And that's the same before and after. Sometimes you don't have enough vegetation to cover it, so we spent 3 weeks going in by hand, borrowing little bits of vegetation, putting them back on and patting them all down again to cover it up. And then you put in these things which are called coir rolls. So this is Aidan and Terry putting them in. They are the outer husk of a coconut, which is a waste product from the coconut industry, packed really tight into these big mozzarella stick sausage shapes. And the idea is that the water flows through, but the peat stays behind, and it creates, this is before and after, literally a day. It creates all these little pools, and so this is what you end up with. So it just gives you an idea of the amount of water that was running through there, and as a result the amount of peat that was being washed off. So this was after we did it, and we put the coir rolls in, and now we've got all these little shallow pools. I was up there 2 days ago, and the amount of dragonflies, frogs, beetles, everything in these pools is phenomenal. Like, it's just buzzing with life, and the vegetation is all starting to come back in it. So this was it 2 days ago. So remember all that bare peat, and within 2 years we now have vegetation back on there. And that's sphagnum moss is actually starting to grow on the logs we put in. Obviously, we don't want to be bringing in coconuts from Sri Lanka if we can avoid it, but it's the industry standard. But we want to push the envelope and try and find a local material. So the two landowners came up with the idea of trialling wool. So we've got a little wool plot trial where we've packed it in really tightly, and we've got researchers from IT Sligo and potentially Northern Ireland NI Water to research how well these might work as an alternative. Big issue up there is recreation erosion. I don't think that'll be any surprise to anyone, just of the impact of the boardwalk there. So we've been doing a lot of work with all the local actors there to try and figure out a way to reduce the pressure on the mountain, but we also needed to do work on the ground to try and reduce the reduce the pressure that's up there. So there was a 30-metre scar line, you can see it here, of people trampling all this Montane Heath vegetation. But can you see this little path snaking through? So that's where we had done what's called light touch works, and the whole idea is that you keep people on this 1 metre to allow the other 29 metres to recover. It works really well. Like, you'll be walking across it and you don't even know that you're staying on the one path. They're like psychologists, the way that they're able to manoeuvre the stones to keep you on the one straight and narrow. But there's a need for more strategic management. So this was the before and after. We had done all this work to try and fix the bare peat areas during lockdown, but then everyone was let out and it was like calves in spring, just like up the mountain. And then we're just back to square one again, like we're back to this again. So there obviously is a need to reduce the visitor pressure alongside all of this stuff. I already talked about conifers. We're trying to get rid of those. Peat cutting is an issue, still happening within the SAC, although much less so. So there needs to be engagement with the people that are doing it, if not even to stop it, but to even just do it at a different time of year, because the same thing with the fires. They're cutting the peat when all the birds are coming in. So red grouse actually really like peat cut areas because it's got that nice mix of short and long vegetation, and it gives them cover while still offering opportunities to feed. But what happens is that they put all their energy into nesting here. Then somebody comes in and cuts peat and disturbs them, and then that's reduced their productivity, their ability to actually rear chicks. So although you get lots of red grouse around areas like this, they're not actually producing the chicks that you need to keep the population going. And then the last one is just our landslips and landslides. You've probably seen it all in the news at the moment, the big landslips that are happening. There was one on the border between Donegal and Tyrone, slipping into our riverways. I think there needs to be more research to figure out why this is happening in these areas. So this is a big area around Doon. You can see a couple of very big peat slides happening here and up there, and that's what they look like. You're also getting a lot of these in the river gullies where the vegetation and the soil is slipping into the rivers, and the main reason is because that's where the sheep go and shelter, and it's got nice sweet short grass that they like to feed on too, so you don't have a root structure there holding it together. So one thing that we're doing in Northern Ireland this winter is trying to fence off some of these areas and put in some tree species, like upland tree species, to try and shore up these banks again, and try and see if it stops these slips from happening. So that's where we're at. We've done we've submitted drafts of both of them. The two management plans have to be in by the end of September. We've done all our stakeholder engagement and talking to landowners. We set up cross-border groups to keep pushing it forward, and now it's due in September. Where we're at the moment is, unfortunately, we don't have any. We've one more round of EU funding left, which isn't going to come out until March next year. That'll give us 5 years, and we're hoping that we've empowered local people and the likes of the Geopark and that with so much knowledge of the site now that if they want to go and apply for funding, they've pretty much got a Bible of the site there to say, look, these guys have said that we need to be investing in X, Y, and Z, and here's the evidence. So it's been a really, really useful exercise, and it'll have a big legacy behind it. It's just whether the funding becomes available. With working in the conservation sector, you're always just bouncing from one funding pot to the next, but at least with these management plans, we've got an evidence base behind it. And that's it. I just wanted to finish with a couple of lovely quotes that we got from people from our landowner or from our stakeholder engagement, and we asked them what they find especially about Cuilcagh, and they said it's without a doubt the wildlife, the recreation value, which are intertwined. one of the few remaining environments of its kind, utterly beautiful and extremely positive impact on their well-being. And I love this one, my Temple of Silence, the quietest, calmest and possibly wildest place close to home. And they want to see it conserved for future generations. So that's me.